Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one of philosophy's most powerful and, let's be honest, most misunderstood ideas, Hegel's dialectic.
From a young age, we're taught to think in a straight line, right? To avoid contradicting ourselves at all costs. But what if that's all wrong? What if contradictions aren't mistakes to be erased, but are actually the very engine of progress, of understanding, of history itself? That's the brilliant, mind-bending puzzle Hegel throws at us.
So, to get our heads around this, let's meet the man himself, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Now, this was a German philosopher living through some seriously chaotic times, the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and somehow, in all that turmoil, he believed he saw a deep, rational pattern moving just beneath the surface. And this is where Hegel just flips the whole script. See, for him, the dialectic isn't just a clever debating trick. He was convinced it was the fundamental operating system of reality itself. The core idea, and this is crucial, is that any concept, any situation actually contains its own opposite. And the tension between those two is what creates all growth. But to really get why this was such a revolutionary idea, we first have to understand the huge philosophical wall he was trying to smash through.
So, the heavyweight champion of philosophy before Hegel was Immanuel Kant. And Kant's big idea was that yes, our reason is incredibly powerful, but it has boundaries. When we try to think about the really big stuff, like did the universe have a beginning, our reason just sort of short-circuits and runs into hard contradictions.
For Kant, hitting one of these contradictions was a warning. It was like a giant flashing stop sign from your own brain telling you you've gone too far and you're chasing an illusion. He saw it as a dead end, plain and simple, proof that there are some things we just can't ever know. But here's where Hegel's genius really shines. He looks at that exact same wall, that same stop sign, and he doesn't see a dead end. He sees a doorway. He realized the contradiction wasn't the problem, it was actually the solution, and the dialectic was his key.
Okay, first things first, we have to bust a huge myth right now. You've probably heard Hegel's method summed up as thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Here's the thing, he never used that phrase, not once. It's a popular oversimplification that totally misses how dynamic and alive his real method is. Instead, Hegel's logic works in what he called 3 moments. Now, it's really important not to think of these as 3 separate steps in a recipe. They're more like 3 interconnected parts of a single fluid motion.
So, moment 1 is the understanding. This is where we grab onto an idea in its most basic, one-sided form. Let's take the simplest concept we can possibly think of, pure being. Just existence. No qualities, no details, just the fact that something is. Seems pretty solid, right?
But then comes moment 2, the dialectical moment. This is where it gets wild. If you really try to think about pure being, with no specific qualities at all, no color, no size, no anything, what are you actually thinking about? You're thinking about nothing. The idea is so abstract, so empty, that it collapses into its total opposite. And that leads us right into the third moment, the speculative one. So the real truth isn't just being or just nothing. The higher truth is the dynamic movement between them. And what do we call that transition from nothing to something? We call it becoming. And bam, you have a new, richer concept that holds the truth of both of the earlier ones inside it. That's the engine in action.
Hegel had this perfect German word for this entire process, aufheben. Now, it's a little tricky to translate, but just think of it as doing 3 things all at once. It cancels out the old opposition, it preserves the essential truth from both sides, and it lifts the whole thing up to a new, higher level. It's not destruction, it's evolution.
All right, so you might be thinking this is a cool logic puzzle, but what's the point? Well, for Hegel, this was no game. He genuinely believed he had discovered the operating system for everything, from our own psychology to the grand sweep of human history.
Let's look at his super famous master-slave dialectic. 2 people struggle for recognition. One wins and becomes the master, the other loses and becomes the slave. Seems like a pretty fixed power relationship, doesn't it? But Hegel says, look closer. The master is actually totally dependent on the slave for validation. Meanwhile, the slave, through their physical work of shaping the world, develops a real, independent sense of self. So that initial setup, it's not stable at all. It's riddled with contradiction. And through this dialectical struggle, the roles are sublated. They're lifted up. And what emerges is a higher truth, that real freedom and true recognition can't be a one-way street. They have to be mutual.
The struggle itself is what leads to a deeper understanding.
And Hegel zoomed this idea way out. He saw all of human history as the story of freedom slowly figuring itself out. I mean, think about it. In ancient empires, maybe only one person, the despot, is considered free. Then you get to the Greek and Roman world where some people are free, the citizens. And then finally, we arrive at the modern world and the principle that all human beings are fundamentally free.
He had this incredible phrase for it, the cunning of reason. He said that history uses the selfish passions and ambitions of great individuals, like Napoleon, who Hegel famously called the world's soul on horseback, to push the grand story of freedom forward, often in ways those people never even intended. So, okay, a really dense 200-year-old idea from a German philosopher. Why should we care? Why does any of this still matter today? Well, as it turns out, it matters a lot.
Now look, Hegel's not without his critics, not by a long shot. Karl Marx famously took the dialectic but said Hegel had it all upside down. The real engine of history is economic class struggle, not ideas. Thinkers like Kierkegaard felt his grand system completely trampled on the real, lived experience of the individual, and some have even argued it's a dangerous idea that can justify authoritarianism by framing it as a necessary stage of history.
But even with all those critiques, his influence is just massive. You honestly can't fully grasp Marxism, existentialism, critical theory, or even tons of modern theories of social justice and recognition without understanding Hegel first. He basically set the terms of the debate for the next 2 centuries. And this all comes back to one of Hegel's most powerful lines. He wrote, "The wounds of spirit heal and leave no scars behind." What he meant was that conflict, struggle, and contradiction aren't just destructive chaos. They are the necessary, painful process we have to go through to arrive at a deeper, more resilient, and more complete truth. The scars don't remain because they've been integrated into something stronger.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty challenging question, doesn't it? In our world, which feels more divided and polarized than ever, Hegel's 200-year-old idea is a real provocation. It asks us to stop seeing conflict as a disaster to be avoided at all costs, and instead to ask ourselves, where could working through this tension, instead of running from it, actually lead us to a higher truth?